The craziest part wasn't that the HOA president tried to tow my truck. It was that she tried to have it taken out of my own garage like the woman. Thought a clipboard was a search warrant and a bad attitude counted as probable cause. I had just dragged myself home from a 12-hour shift at the firehouse, still smelling like smoke, diesel, and stale coffee. And all I wanted was to kick off my boots, crack a cold one, and let somebody else's problems stay somebody else's for one blessed evening. Instead, I closed my garage door behind my cherry red '87 Silverado, heard the rattle of a tow truck outside, and realized peace in this neighborhood had just officially packed up and left town. My name's Archer Zane. I've lived in that subdivision for 5 years. And until Harmony Pritchard took over the HOA, life there was boring in the best possible way. You know what I mean? Trim hedges, wave at the mailman, mind your business, grill on Sundays, that kind of boring. Then Harmony showed up, platinum blonde, 50-something, little dog, always barking like it was auditioning for a panic attack. Heels sharp enough to stab concrete, and a voice that could make glass reconsider its life choices. She was the kind of woman who carried a clipboard the way medieval kings carried swords. Like mere possession of the thing gave her divine authority over your driveway, your flower pots, your soul. That evening, I heard heavy boots on the driveway, so I opened the side door off the garage and stepped out. 2 guys in reflective vests were standing there beside the garage door, one of them holding a crowbar and looking at that door like he expected it to surrender. I said, "What the hell do you think you're doing?" And the taller one jumped like I'd fired a warning shot. He mumbled something about a work order for a red pickup truck in violation of HOA rules. I looked at him, looked at my closed garage, then back at him and said, "In my garage?" And right on cue, here came Harmony strutting up my driveway with that smug little smile, her dog yapping. Sunglasses up on her forehead, like she was about to give a TED Talk on suburban purity. She said, "You were warned, Mr. Zane. Commercial vehicles are not allowed to be stored on residential property." I actually laughed because sometimes the stupid hits you so hard that laughing is all your body's got left. "It's not a commercial vehicle," I told her. "It's my personal truck, registered, insured, and parked inside my own damn garage." She gave that little dismissive flick with the clipboard and said they'd had complaints, said it was an eyesore. I looked around at my closed garage door and said, "From who? The garbage can across the street?" She did not enjoy that. She said the HOA was authorized to enforce community standards, and since I had refused to comply, they were removing the violation. Removing the violation. Like my truck was disease-produce. That was the moment I stepped back inside, threw the deadbolt, pulled out my phone, and called the sheriff. The tow guys immediately started looking less brave. Funny how courage drains out of people when the law gets invited to the party. I told Harmony, plain as I could, "You just tried to break into my property." She rolled her eyes and called me dramatic, which is exactly what people say when they know they've gone too far and are hoping confidence will do the heavy lifting. 10 minutes later, the deputy rolled up with lights flashing. And I'm not ashamed to say I love the sight of those red and blues more than I've loved some birthdays. I met him at the driveway and told him exactly what happened. He turned to Harmony and asked if it was true. She straightened her blouse, lifted her chin, and started with that whole polished civic volunteer tone, saying the HOA had rights to enforce rules. He cut her off cold. "Not by forcing entry into someone's private garage. You don't." Then I asked if he wanted to see the footage. His eyebrows went up. "You have cameras?" I said, "Inside and out." "Let me back up a sec. I'm a firefighter, which means I've seen enough of human stupidity to believe in smoke detectors, backup generators, and cameras pointed at anything people might get weird about." So I took him inside and pulled the clips up on the monitor over my workbench. The inside camera had the crowbar guy stepping onto the little side platform and testing the handle. The outside camera had Harmony pointing right at the garage, nodding while the men talked, basically conducting the whole dumb little orchestra. The deputy stood there with his arms folded, jaw tightening more every second. He muttered, "This guy is about 1 pound of pressure away from breaking and entering." I paused the video at the exact frame where I came out and interrupted them. When we walked back outside, Harmony was already trying to distance herself from the tow crew, talking faster now. saying she never authorized illegal entry, only wanted them to check whether the vehicle was accessible. The deputy asked for her copy of the HOA rules. She handed it over. He flipped to the section she'd flagged and read it out loud. Visible violations. Visible. My truck was inside a closed garage. Case damp, near closed right there on my driveway. The tow driver gave Harmony a look that said he'd just realized exactly what kind of fool he'd let himself be hired by. Then he and his partner climbed back in and hauled out. Once they were gone, the deputy told me he wanted to file a formal report and asked if I was willing to press charges. Harmony actually sputtered. "You're going to let this man criminalize a community volunteer over a parking issue?" He said, in the calmest voice imaginable. "This stopped being a parking issue the second you attempted to breach private property under false pretenses." Her face went blotchy red, her dog barked like it was trying to argue case law, and she stormed off down the sidewalk in those stupid heels, catching one in a crack and nearly eating pavement. I'll admit it, I enjoyed that part more than was probably healthy. Next morning, I went down to the sheriff's office with the footage on a thumb drive, printed copies of the bylaws, and a level of organization that comes from being real tired of other people's nonsense. That's where I met Officer Langley, and he told me something interesting. They already had a file open on Harmony. Turns out I wasn't the first person she'd tried to bully into submission. One couple had complained about motion alarms she'd pointed toward their flower beds. Another resident said she tried to find them over the shape of their bushes, which is a sentence I still hate knowing is real. Langley said the county prosecutor might take the case and that I may need to testify. I told him I'd be there with bells on. 3 days later, word spread that Harmony had been suspended pending review, and that's when the neighborhood started changing on me. Folks who'd barely nodded before were suddenly stopping by. I got handshakes, beers, little quiet about time conversations over fences. Then one evening, while I was in the garage working on the Silverado's brakes, a man named Theo came over carrying a manila folder. Vietnam vet cap, face like old leather, steady eyes. He said he used to be on the HOA board until Harmony steamrolled a vote over surveillance cameras. Then he handed me that folder like it was evidence from a spy movie. Inside were meeting minutes, emails, all kinds of documents Harmony never thought anybody kept. Fines pushed through without full board votes. HOA money spent on decorative upgrades to her own yard. Irrigation rerouted to benefit her backyard garden. I looked at Theo and said, "This is gold." He grinned and said, "Son, this is dynamite." That was the first twist. The moment this whole thing stopped being about my truck and became something uglier. I scanned everything, backed it up, sent copies to Langley. Within a week, the HOA called a special meeting at the clubhouse, and for once, every chair was full, plus people standing along the walls. Harmony stood in the corner with her arms folded like she still thought this was salvageable. Jalen, the soft-spoken board president she'd clearly bulldozed for months, announced the vote on her removal. She called a witch hunt and took one shot at my truck, calling a rust bucket. Somebody from the back yelled. At least it didn't try to break into anyone's house, and the whole room cracked up. Then every hand in that clubhouse went up to remove her. Every single one. I figured that might finally be the end of it. Yeah, that happened for about 48 hours. Then Langley called and said Harmony was being charged over the garage incident, and right after that Theo showed up again. This time with Lila, a forensic accountant in her 30s with sharp eyes, a heavier-than-it-looked laptop bag, and the kind of expression people wear when numbers have personally offended them. She'd been reviewing the HOA budgets and found thousands of dollars listed under vague headings like maintenance and beautification with no invoices. No vendor names, nothing that matched reality. 22 grand for irrigation expansion, though the sprinklers hadn't been touched in years. Charges for winter tree trimming in a region where nobody schedules that service. She spun the laptop toward me and said, "This isn't sloppy bookkeeping. This is theft wearing khakis." Now we were talking embezzlement. Langley brought in county investigators, subpoenaed records, and once the auditors got access to the cloud account, the whole rotten structure collapsed. Nearly $70,000 had been moved over 18 months into a fake landscaping company with a disconnected number a bogus tax ID, and a P.O. box for an address. Harmony had approved the payments, and two other board members, Marcus Blaine and Sheila Kent, had rubber-stamped them. She got arrested on fraud charges the following Monday. No drama, no speech, just two unmarked cars and a warrant. According to Langley, she tried the classic move, trusted the wrong people, delegated too much, honest mistake. Problem was, the forensic trail was cleaner than her story. Too clean, deliberate, and somehow, that still wasn't the worst of it. Theo called me 2 days later and said I needed to get to the clubhouse. Lila was there, with a binder labeled Security Initiative Phase 3. Sounded boring as hell, wasn't? It was a proposal signed by Harmony to install what she described as monitoring equipment inside select homes under the excuse of checking for structural issues from soil shifting. But the devices listed weren't seismic monitors. They were directional microphones and RF receivers. Illégal surveillance gear. Lila had receipts showing HOA money paid for 3 of them. I felt this cold weight drop in my chest when I realized where this was going. The next morning, Langley brought an estate tech team, and they found one of those devices hidden behind a vent cover in a couple's master bedroom. A couple Harmony had fined more than once for so-called late-night disturbances. The device had a battery pack, a SIM card, and it had been transmitting in real time. That was the moment the whole neighborhood stopped seeing her as a power-tripping busybody and started seeing her for what she really was: dangerous. The DOJ got involved after that. Marcus flipped fast, confessed to installing devices in exchange for immunity. Sheila followed the same general path once the walls started closing in. And then, because apparently the universe had decided this story needed one more layer of crazy, investigators uncovered that Harmony had illegally filled in an old flood retention pit and rerouted runoff into a trench that redirected water toward lower properties, including mine. Also, she could enlarge her backyard. She'd filed fake paperwork, cited a lab that didn't exist, used a permit number that belonged to a dog kennel in Chattanooga. I swear to God, you can't make people like this up. If I wrote her as a movie villain, folks would say she was too much. By the time the trial came around, the whole neighborhood had this weird pulse of disbelief and anticipation running through it. People passed updates at the mailbox like wartime intelligence. The courtroom downtown was small, cold, no nonsense. Harmony showed up in a beige suit that looked like it was losing its own argument. Her defense tried to call the surveillance devices experimental monitoring tools, which lasted about as long as it took the cybercrime unit to present hundreds of hours of captured private audio, all neatly cataloged. When I took the stand, the prosecutor asked me why I installed cameras in my garage in the first place. I told the truth, because I didn't trust the HOA. Turned out I was right. That line just hung there in the room. Nobody laughed. Nobody moved. The judge came back after recess with a voice like a saw blade and found Harmony guilty across the board. Criminal trespass, attempted unlawful entry, financial fraud, illegal surveillance, misuse of municipal land, obstruction of environmental infrastructure. 6 years in state prison. No parole before 2. The HOA got placed under third-party oversight. Bogus fines were refunded. Damaged homeowners were compensated. And the reserve fund had to be rebuilt without hammering residents for the cost of her corruption. When I walked out of the courthouse, a local reporter shoved a mic my way and asked if I had a comment. I looked straight in the camera and said, "Don't mess with people who know how to read the fine print." Not my smoothest line ever, but under the circumstances, it played just fine. A few weeks later, the neighborhood held a gathering in the park. The old drainage layout had been restored. The temporary fencing was gone. Kids were tearing through sprinklers. Theo was at the grill flipping burgers like a man personally reclaiming peace, and Lila, reluctantly, heroically, had agreed to serve as treasurer for the rebuilt board. Folks came up to shake my hand, thank me, tell me they finally felt like they could breathe again. And, standing there with a soda in one hand, watching porch light people turn back into actual neighbors, I realized the best part of winning wasn't seeing Harmony lose. It was seeing fear leave the place. That was the real payoff. That was the hallowed, satisfying, deeply beautiful part. That night, I pulled in my driveway, parked the Silverado in my garage, hit the deadbolt, and just stood there for a second with the smell of motor oil, old steel, and sawdust around me. The same garage Harmony tried to violate had turned out to be the crack in the whole rotten wall. One deadbolt, one camera, one stupid overreach, and the whole empire came down. So here's what I want to know. When somebody wraps control in the language of rules and community standards, how long do you think people should tolerate it before pushing back? And where's the line between keeping order and feeding a tyrant in sensible shoes? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Tell me what you would have done, and if you've ever dealt with power-hungry HOA nonsense, shady officials, or anybody who thought authority meant ownership. I want to hear your story too.